Thank you. My name is Jim Maland. I'm with the sports group at Stantec, and I've been designing winter facilities probably for about 32 years of my 37-year career. Do I really look that old? Anyway, I have been doing that, and it's been quite exciting. I'm head of a group that does aquatics and ice, so I'm sometimes known as the Iceman, sometimes the aquatic guy, but I am also known as Jim. You can call me Jim. At any rate, we're heavily involved with a lot of strategic projects around the country, placemaking, destinations, things like that. And so I'm going to share a little bit of the strategy of design. Simon did a great job of sort of outlining a lot of the criteria we have to look at. So I might speed through those in the sense of time when we get to some of those, but I also want to mainly show some real interesting projects we've done. As I lose my name. So with that, reimagining ice and water. Again, we do a lot of work with ice, and so we know how to use these facilities. We're often the specialists in these kinds of projects with consultants and landscape architects throughout the country. But the important thing to know is successful outdoor year-round recreational facilities don't just happen. They really have to be thought about very effectively. You saw a lot of the issues that Simon brought up. And I guess what it really comes down to is you're putting these plazas in areas where you're sort of diametrically, you're designing for winter where we want warmth, we don't want wind, we want warm things to be around. And then in summer, we want the complete opposite thing. So orientation, structure, the design of the site gets really challenging to work all 4 seasons. And so you can't just do what works with one and the other. You have to think about how these different amenities have to be supplied, supported, and how circulation works as well as the comfort levels. So an important thing to be thinking about. One of the planning strategies we use for placemaking is the power of 10. Basically 10 places to be, 10 things to do, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And what this really requires, frankly, is a lot of real effort by the person in the community that's running these facilities, because it's heavily programmed so that there are events going on. It just isn't about what you put on the site. It's the programmed events on the site. And so, but it is very successful. We're doing a project right now implementing this in Caldwell, Idaho. I'll tell you about it in a moment. Anyway, successful 4-season design. Simon covered a lot of this. Hey, make winter fun, embrace winter. We're from here. Let's not let it go by us. Let's hang on to it. Let's design for comfort. All those things with the sun, the wind, and fire and heat are important. Programming reliable activities in the winter. Certainly reliable is not always reliable. As we know, we look outside and we feel the warmth of yesterday. A lot of winter can go away in a moment, as Simon indicated as well. And so it's important that facilities be designed for reliability to bring people back throughout the winter. And certainly use of snow. We've in some of our down mountain projects, we've just had, frankly, the Zamboni run out, dump the shavings on a little plaza, and it's amazing what fun can be created by little children by a pile of snow. So those types of things can be very simple, but they can get more complex, like some of the items that Simon was talking about. But essentially, the nightscaping, making sure lighting, making sure it looks fun as well as feels good when you're there is very important. So what we do is we use water for the foundation of most of our 4-season designs. We call it summer water in our office and winter water. Winter water to you probably is what's called ice, and it usually takes a little more finesse than just waiting for things to freeze if you want something to happen properly. Warm weather water can be passive fountains like this, or it can be little interactive channels like shown on the left, which is down in Burnsville at the heart of the city. Or on the right here, a ground fountain spray with lights, music, etc. This is a fountain we did out in Central Park in Maple Grove. And as discussed earlier, ice needs to be reliable. You have to be able to go to some place and expect it. Why we, in probably 30, 40 years ago when I was at Tyke, you could go and rely on natural ice, but you can't do that anymore. We put refrigeration in almost everything we do in this environment. I'm afraid even in Edmonton, where Simon's from, they're going to be doing it. I was at the Winter City Conference a few years ago presenting, and in February, and the streets were wet. So this is it's definitely a change, but it's definitely something that has to be invested in to make people come back and have a useful thing. We like to use an ice ribbon for the winter activator. You might ask, what is an ice ribbon? And I'll say, well, hey, it's a transformation. It's a transformation. Oop, that isn't going to happen here on this animation. But it's essentially transforming rectangular shapes of ice, traditional forms of ice, rectangular, into more relaxed forms, ribbons of ice, so to speak, as you see here, that can wander through the park. It gives a lot more flexibility to the design rather than dropping about a 16,000 square foot chunk of concrete in the middle of a park and expecting it to look good in the summer. This gives you some flexibility. And this is sort of, in our mind, is sort of similar to what happened in aquatics about 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the rectangular pool for swimming in suddenly became morphed into these very erratic shapes, water from zero to 16 feet deep, places where you could swim where you didn't have to know how to swim and have a good time. Well, sort of with ice. You make a rectangular sheet of ice, what happens in Minnesota? State of hockey. A hockey game comes up, pucks are flying. It's difficult for people that maybe want to have a good time skating to skate. Well, guess what? You can't play hockey on a skating ribbon. So we've solved that problem. Ice ribbons have been wonderfully successful, both in the winter. This is Maggie Daly Park, 800 people, a typical weekend in Chicago, as well as in the summer. And this doesn't look like a skating ribbon, and it isn't, but it's the center part of the skating ribbon, a place where we've created some space to do something else. And so these are some significant climbing towers in the middle of Maggie Daly Park that they use for some of the summer programming, amongst other things. The cost range for these things can be dramatic. About the least expensive is around $900,000, and they can go up to $3.5 million. And that is really only for the critical ice systems, the piping, the refrigeration plant, the containment systems. It's not for the general site development. It's not for the buildings to put these amenities and put people in. So it's highly dependent on really the site conditions as well. Certainly ice and water aren't always good, especially when they're close to each other. So certainly that has to be looked at carefully. But the length of the season, the area of the ice surface, the quality of the systems we put in, from the very inexpensive commercial prefabricated refrigeration plants to custom-made refrigeration plants that last 40, 50 years, the season of operation and the sophistication of the design all come into play in the cost of these facilities. The first ice ribbon was designed and constructed 10 years ago in Elkhart by Stantec, by my group. There are now 11 ice ribbon projects under our belt from coast to coast. And most recently, for those of you that may have been there, in Central Park in Maple Grove, we have an ice ribbon that's part of a larger park, which I'll get into in a short time. There's a lot of problems to solve when you bring ice to any climate, even Minnesota, even in Edmonton. And they mainly have to do with a lot of weather issues: wind, rain, high ambient, low ambient temperatures, the humidity, direct and indirect solar radiation. These all have a huge impact in the amount of refrigeration and the feasibility of design and the sophistication of the design to make sure we have skatable ice for those 4 months. But also partial shading, blowing dust, snow removal, other big things with weather we have to make sure we have in our design criteria. And another issue, not so important, it's easily solved. Sinking the Zamboni can be easily solved by just not skating on natural ponds. But other things, performance expectations, do you have to have reliable ice? Is this a competitive facility that has Olympic type events on it? Access, snow removal, rain, how do you cross the ribbon into the middle without causing a chaos and a safety issue? Startup and shutdown procedures, all these things have to be carefully discussed with the owner, because if they don't have a grip on what they're getting and how they have to operate this thing, it will be a lousy facility. And these things are all very important, all on our list of things we go over with clients as we go into a design like this. Typical locations for these kinds of amenities: resorts, town centers, gateways, major community parks. And certainly weather is a big issue on the feasibility. This is a map here of the mean temperature below 32. And you can see my magic red line. We have to look at this yearly because climate is changing. That's true. And the red line in this particular arrangement, above the red line, we feel comfortable with putting a four-season design in without doing too much extra to accommodate issues that would crop up with ice feasibility. You get below the red line, we have to look at shade, we have to look at structures that help us enable the ice to be skatable for those seasons, or really shorten up the ice season. Some of you may have been in Texas, or you might have been in San Diego and skated for maybe 2 weeks in the middle of winter when the sun is at its lowest and it's as cool as possible. But that isn't a very long season to invest in something like this. The year-round use becomes challenging, but most difficulties come in the transition, the shoulder seasons. The good thing is the summer, from essentially March, April, I should say from the spring of May through September, is pretty easy and pretty reliable. In the winter, from November to early March or mid-March, about 4 months of time can be typically attained by refrigeration for skating facilities in this climate. But that transition season is a season when you're taking things down, switching over to another mode. It's another area where there's lots of rain, the leaves are falling. It's a little more challenging to have reliable programming there. So something you have to be concerned of, but yet still getting close to 8 months, 9 months of very active use on a park is a pretty dramatic improvement from what we're doing right now. So we typically go through with our clients our potential winter uses, finding compatible uses for a plaza, for a park, for a destination. And this is kind of the master list, so to speak. There's other things we've got in our pocket we may not show you today, but essentially there's lots of different ways to do skating, from the recreational skating to the competition to ice shows, dinner shows, other things like sledding involving snow, sledding and cross-country skiing. Well, what do we do here in Minnesota now when we don't have snow? Well, Three Rivers Park District, City of Minneapolis, has snowmaking, in Minnesota for cross-country skiing and sledding. So it's something that's come here. There's ways to deal with it. It certainly is an expense, and you have to basically make a decision whether it's worth that and find ways to generate revenue to offset some of those things. The other thing with buildings around here, using the buildings for coffee, we have skate rentals operating out of Starbucks Coffee in Milwaukee. Casual dining, fine dining, a community center in one of these locations is a great place for a lot of the events we're showing here ongoing, as well as indoor farmers market, which we're starting to see around here. Summer uses is easy. The list is very long. We've got all the different kinds of fairs, music venues, and festivals that we can have, not to mention ice cream. We've got sporting kind of activities, bocce ball, mini golf, but also outdoor movings, outdoor weddings, interactive play facilities, just relaxing around a nice water feature, interactive water features, as well as skating rental, game tables, music. And this one here, food trucks, a culture that's becoming pretty popular throughout the country. Very popular, a lot of the facilities we do. The climbing, the plaza-style skate parks. You saw at the very beginning of this presentation, our sports group developed that sort of dream of a plaza-style skate park with an ice ribbon around it. And one of my favorite, being the aquatics guy and the ice guy, is the lazy river that converts to a skating trail. Instead of getting 4 months out of the outdoor pool of revenue, you generate 8 months by having another season in the winter of reliable skating. Haven't done that yet, but we're looking for anybody interested in that. Successful four-season park. This is how water and ice is so wonderful. This is Canal Park in Washington, D.C. Obviously, winter works well with refrigerated ice. It's sort of a no-brainer. Spring, a little too cold for interactive water, but if the interactive water has light or music, it can be a spectacular thing to look at and attract people into the venue without having to walk through the water. Summer, obviously, water works well in the heat of the summer, and especially interactive water in the fall. Engaging the area again with some of the interactive water as more of a fountain aesthetic, and food, etc., becomes a great place to be. Bottom line, access and parking is a big deal for any of these big venues. This is Chicago Maggie Daily on a weekend. There's tons of people here. Obviously, Chicago has a lot of transit nearby. And frankly, one of the interesting things about this park, we built this all on about between 4 and 6 feet of geofoam. This is all built on foam on top of a parking structure. We had to reduce the load so the parking structure wouldn't collapse, but a venue where that is very important to this, of parking coming up above and using the facility. So some of the project examples. This is a very TOD-oriented project. In fact, one of the partners was the Transit Authority in in New York. This is in Lower Long Island, about maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes north of Kennedy Airport. And the city was involved in this project, a not-for-profit organization that's run and programming this facility, as well as the TOD was involved. And you can kind of see how this works. You can see sort of the transit running, see if this works, the transit running kind of slicing through here, transit station here, entering into this Wyandanch Plaza that we developed with Olin Partnership. And so how did this work? Well, these are fresh off the press. This thing just opened in mid-December, and so here's skating, and it looks like it's working pretty well. And from what I can see here, a lot of people going around and having a great time in this plaza. That's, as you can see in the background, it's housing oriented above, and then certainly condensed commercial development below. And it's in kind of a heart of an area that was sort of deteriorating in Wyandanch. So it's a redevelopment project, and the whole purpose of this was to sort of generate a spur to move things forward in the community and get things going again. So one of the things we always do with ice, fire and ice is a real thing. It works well. So having a little place to warm up, like a fire pit, gas fire pit, or in the background here, you can kind of see what happens in the summer. All this railing goes away. This becomes a very beautiful plaza in the summer months. And so what you have behind here is sort of a little raised area for performances, as well as all around that area are a lot of jets that make a pretty spectacular fountain in the summer months. So we have water, again, used for the off-season as well as just performances. Pretty common formula for a lot of these types of destination plaza. This is another one we did, Canal Park Ice Ribbon. This is in Washington, D.C. It's on the other side of the Beltway where people don't go to as much. In fact, the first time I visited the site, I took the taxi, and the guy said, "Why are you going here?" I said, "Well, I'm going here because we're doing a project." He said, "Well, there's nothing here. Everybody leaves at 5 o'clock. I said, "Well, that's why I'm here." So we were working with Olin Partnership on this one as well. It's a 3-block long park, and it's surrounded by a lot of businesses, as well as it's surrounded by, again, new residential development is growing up in the area, high-density residential with commercial below. And this is one of the blocks that we put on the ribbon of ice that uses, certainly, as you can see, ice pretty successfully in the winter months. It's sort of a bone-shaped. It was a very long, narrow site. But as you see, the design and use of the railing is really important in something like this, because of in Washington, D.C., you think we have warm winters. They have really warm winters. And so containing the cold by these railings, these glass railings, is really important design function we use. And we always make these so they can go away in the summer months, but they are highly important throughout the winter. And certainly other things. In this case, there was a pretty neat cube that was put on top of the building right here that doesn't show very well, but it's got a camera that films the people going skating around, and you can look at yourself skating around in this big cube, as well as advertises to the traffic passing by. So it's a pretty good advertisement, as well as a fun thing for people that are there. This is it in the summer months. You can kind of see in the background the center of the problem with ice and water is ice takes a really dense profile of a lot of pipes to refrigerate and keep things cold, and so there's no room, barely enough room to get concrete through between the pipes, much less things like water features. And so we often use the water feature becomes the area that's not ice, and then the ice ribbon itself becomes sort of the plaza, the area you circulate around. But it works quite well. And here on part of the ice, the center part, that sort of square block we saw, is where the restaurant pulls out and brings their tables and chairs. And so people can go out and sit, have lunch, have dinner, have a drink, watch their children playing in the interactive water, or participate with them as well. And again, food trucks become pretty vital here, particularly at the noon hour. All the businesses nearby, the food trucks line up along the south side of the site, and becomes a great place for the people in the businesses to come out and have lunch, sit, watch the water, and a lot of comfortable things to do at that time. Hudson Park Boulevard is another project we did. This is a little bit like my river to skate away idea, but it was designed. We took this all the way to construction documents. It hasn't been built yet, but this is in the ice mode. It's sort of a circular ribbon-like form of ice that becomes a water feature. This is more stagnant water with jets. The one I was talking about earlier is actually making this a lazy river where we circulate this water and people can go around and sit in inner tubes in the summer. Another project we did in Washington Harbor, this is in Georgetown. Some of you might have been here. I put this picture in to show the background. That's the Potomac. This is one of the few pieces of real estate, other than some of the new stuff developing on the north end of Washington, that is on the Potomac. So it's a spectacular place to be. Crew boats going up and down the water. This great plaza here. And this is a high-end residential development up above and down below, bars, restaurants. And so what we were brought out here is the redeveloper of this facility. There was an old water feature here that was sort of dysfunctional, multi-leveled, kind of complicated, not that exciting, and it was dying. And so sort of was the traffic coming to this area. So we went in there and redid the water fountain, working with Crystal Fountains out of Toronto, and created this pretty spectacular light show that has lights as well as music. And it's surrounded by, on 360 degrees, bars and restaurants that look over this. So it's a pretty spectacular sight, as well as the view out onto the Potomac on one side. So that was a pretty easy fix, but then what did we do? They've never had anybody come here in the winter. This becomes a cold, icy place. The Potomac's out there, wind blowing in. Why would you want to be there? Well, maybe if we had some skating, that would work pretty nice. So in this case, it was complicated. We had to bring the ice and bring the system over the top of the fountain. As you saw, there was a lot of trenches, etc. with that. And so this isn't ideally how we like to bring ice. We like to have ice usually where you switch, the pipes are in place. You start the transition pretty easily to the ice mode. This one, they have to do some setup, but I pulled this off the website. There's great results. This whole area is seeing people at a time it never saw before in downtown Georgetown, right along the waterfront. So very successful story for this development. And this is a project we're working on right now in Caldwell, Idaho. It's a plaza, and what they've done is Destination Caldwell cleared out, this is the whole block right here. They cleared out this corner of the block and essentially created the back sides of these 100-plus-year-old buildings being the front side to the park. And so a lot of challenges with that. This is the summer mode, kind of how things would happen in summer. And sort of this is the winter mode, where it goes into more of an ice mode with a central plaza here where a lot of figurines and winter things were going to be set up to make kind of an exciting journey around the ice ribbon as well as the rink. But you can see some of these old buildings, they're 100-plus-year-old buildings, have to suddenly take the load of a ice resurfacer full of water, have to take refrigeration equipment that vibrates. It's getting very expensive, we're finding, to reinforce some of these 100-plus-year-old buildings that have kind of been jury-rigged over the years. And so a lot of cost was involved in that, but yet it preserved the historic kind of aspect of the city. And this is kind of it in a rendering. We're just getting into construction documents right now. You can see the plaza, the amphitheater to the right. In the background is sort of the Boulevard area where a lot of we're expecting restaurants and bars to show up. We've got kind of the plaza here, the skate ribbon running along the back alleyway where we have structures with heating elements in them to extend the winter and the fall season for comfortable seating. And there it is in its full glory. In the summer months, we bring water into it. Again, the most important aspect of this is probably the programming of the amphitheater here, which has everything from theater to music to art, etc., going on it all year round. And so again, a nice way to transition from summer to winter. Another project, this is the project we did in Central Park in Maple Grove. You can see kind of the ice ribbon is sort of that eccentric piece of white concrete, and the interactive water feature is over here right next to the building. And so essentially this is in the ribbon. This isn't a particularly busy day. They had a very successful last year. This photo was taken late at night with not too many people on it. We can see the building, the warming house, the skate rental in the background, and the ice ribbon, as well as a pretty neat interactive fountain. This involves a lot of lights, and so this, if they're having a venue or a wedding going on inside the building, they can jump the aesthetics up of the fountain to a higher level. Maggie Daly ice ribbon. This is a pretty spectacular piece. This is the grand poopah of all ice ribbons in the country. It's a 1/4 mile long. It has a skating grade that goes up and downhill. Not like we just saw at Crashed Ice. You don't have to wear helmets and pads. No, this is for the general public. It is a little bit of work going up, but you should see the smiles people going down. They love it. and it's quite talked about. It's right down along the waterfront next to Millennium Park, drawing big crowds. They make $1 million a year just on skate rentals at this facility. So it's been a very successful venue for them. And in the summer months, like I mentioned, we worked with Michael Van Valkenburg on this. He put a pretty spectacular climbing structure in the middle. They're still working on how to do the summer the best possible, but again, it's a venue that's very popular and doing its job in the winter months. This is a Millennium Park right next door. This is on Michigan Avenue, right below the Bean. You can see that in the upper rendering here. It's been a very successful ice project, as well as you can see here in the summer. They bring in the bar, the temporary bar, seating, etc. Again, a great place to be with the Bean so close, with Millennium Park so close. And National Gallery of Art right on the skipping the yeah. It's right along the mall. I think that was the word I was looking for. Thank you. Anyway, this is a transformation of ice, more of a rectangular shaped ice rink, sunken down inside a pretty spectacular fountain. They bring in some temporary structures for some of the ice, but then in the summertime it becomes this pretty spectacular water feature in the middle of the sculpture gardens. And certainly we do a lot of down mountain work. This is in a ski resort. You saw this earlier in Simon's pictures that we did in the down mountain development area. Have all these nice little cozy places where there's gas fireplaces. And then in the summer months, they bring in groups for theater, they bring in movies, they bring in skating on a hard surface with rollerblades, etc. So it's a pretty action-packed space in the down mountain area of North Star. And so finally, this is a project, we're just starting construction now in Spokane. Riverfront Park is the site of the World's Fair back in '79. This is very aging, and this is the gateway into the park. They're redeveloping a lot of the park now, and the first thing you're going to be seeing now coming into the park is this pretty cool skating ribbon. So that's what I have, and so thank you very much. I'll let John take over.